It's a couple minutes after 12. And first thing I have on the agenda is the invocation. Tom?
Let us pray. Our gracious God, we gather today. As we do that, we seek your wisdom, your guidance. Give us courage and strength in each of us as we work towards solutions to any problems that we may have. And for the betterment of the board, for the betterment of the community. Lord, we ask you to have us lead with integrity and make our decision making for the good of all that we serve.
Approval of the minutes from the last board meetings?
Motion approved.
Anybody have any questions about it? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, we have Elizabeth on the phone here. She's got her 5th case of COVID, I think, right? Something like that? Second. Okay. Can you taste anything?
Yeah, you can
Okay. It's a heck of a weight loss treatment. I tried it and it didn't work very well. I don't support it for anybody, that's for sure. Operating Materials Committee report.
In keeping in step with South Carolina law concerning our gender transition procedure for minors, while maintaining access to material already in our collection, the Material Committee unanimously voted to recommend the following revisions to our collection development and maintenance policy. It reads, the library system recognizes parents, legal guardians, have a fundamental right to be involved in all aspects of their minor children's lives, especially in matters as life-changing as gender identification. Therefore, materials targeting audiences age 13 to 17 with characters who have transitioned or are in the process of transitioning from a gender that corresponds to their biological sex to a different gender will be located in the adult collection. This includes materials with illustrations, themes, or storylines that celebrate, portray, or affirm gender transitioning, whether the changes are social, names, pronouns, or physical. And we recommend this to the board.
Okay, it comes from committee, so it doesn't need a second. Is there any discussion?
Can you explain a little bit, are there books we currently have that we're concerned about, or is this like books in the future, or a little bit of both, or I think just trying to understand kind of where this originates from.
We have already moved to the ones in juvenile collection, and let's see, at last count, just with a broad keyword search, no other titles fall under things, but with a broad keyword search and books I have read, we have approximately 33, 34 in the young adult section that we're talking about.
And what keywords bring up those?
You could do transgender, you could do gender identity, and sort through it.
So, when we think about, because this is pretty broad, is the purpose of this to move material that specifically affirms gender transitioning, or is that what we're really trying to accomplish?
I think what we're trying to accomplish is to take the books that deal with transgender issues that are in the juvenile and young adult section. We've already moved the juvenile section, anything in the young adult section, and that, for the people who aren't familiar with it, that is for individuals who are 13 to 17 years of age. When they turn 18, they're an adult according to the law, and they would be able to have an adult card, have access to the adult books for checking them out. But we're just bringing the library's collection in line with the current state law, which is that no one under 18 can be assisted in transition of, or any kind of gender transitioning or change or attempt to change or any of that. So the library would be moving any books that are targeted at that 13 to 17-year-old age group and are currently kept in the collection of the young adult section. Those would be moved into the adult section, and they would only be able to be checked out by somebody who had a card that allowed them to check out adult books.
State law doesn't prevent somebody from using a pronoun other than their birth pronoun, right?
No, but we're not basing this on necessarily on state law. The using the pronouns is the first step of social transitioning. I mean, we're supported, we've looked at the state law, and since there is a law, why would we be promoting providing material that is contrary to the law? But we're not dependent just on everything the state law has outlined. We have included the first step, which is really, the first step shows up more in the juvenile books. The young adult books deal more with the sexual problems involved with gender transitioning.
Didn't you say in your opening comments that this was to conform with state law?
I said in keeping with with it. I didn't say it was based on it, but we've come alongside, taken confidence, taken cues from it. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the basis for, I think I understand the idea of moving material that is actively affirming, portraying gender transitioning in order to comply with current state statutes. What's the thinking behind that? This policy, to me, seems to go a good bit further than that, in that it says if there is, I think specifically that third paragraph in the proposed policy, the one that reads, this includes materials, et cetera, et cetera. Like the word portray, the way I read this is that if a book has a transgender character in it, of any type, in the book, not like it is a book about the character. It could be somebody's friend, it could be that book now becomes adult material. Am I understanding the policy correctly?
Yes. Well, for example, it's in our new book right now, so I don't know where it's actually going to go. I imagine it's a fiction new book, it'll go on adult. But just for a specific, we have a book now that's a new book. It has a 13-year-old as one of the main characters. The 13-year-old is highly influenced by what the town calls a tranny, a rebel-looking tranny who comes to town. And this person, clearly old enough to buy alcohol, buys drugs and alcohol for the 13-year-old and their friend. The 13-year-old becomes more and more intrigued with this whole rebel-looking character, ends up going through transition themselves, and later as a transitioned male presenting, influences the niece to go on. So yeah, there's characters, it's an adult character, but it's an adult character influencing a child, then I would suspect that book should be, whether it has a 13-year-old main character or not, be located in adult.
I think Joe's question was to not a case like that book, but a book where the theme or the story of the book is not related around gender transitioning, but a character, maybe they have an adult relative that's transgender, or they have a friend that's transgender, and has nothing to do with the story besides the fact of having a character in the book that identifies as transgender.
Well, if you show me one, I don't know, we could look at it, if it mentions, oh, my uncle's a transgender, what we think, I don't know. But every book I've looked at here, and I've read several, they deal very specifically. We included a lot of these words, Joe, to help the library, because that's all was asking us to be more specific, so I included a lot of these definitions.
So what's the, sorry, Ken, go ahead.
I was gonna say, since I was what Brian was saying, when you mentioned about you use Google to search these words, these certain phrases and words out to let you know, is that what you're saying? I'm sorry.
No, I looked the library keyword search.
Okay, so you're not just Googling the word and it pops up?
No, no.
Okay, I was looking.
I mean, so what's the, like, the example you gave, I would think that if we have a book with somebody that's conducting illegal activity, like selling drugs or providing alcohol to an underage kid, we clearly have basis for relocating that outside of the fact that it has a transgender character in it. I think my concern is my question was the appearance of, because we use the word portray, and you confirm my understanding that the presence of a transgender character in a book in any case is grounds for relocating it to the adult section. So that seems to be on its face discriminatory to me, and also just unnecessary. It doesn't seem to me to address what we're actually trying to address. The word portray specifically in the policy is what I'm getting at. So I'll give you an example. There's a book called Space at the Table that is a book that's written by a father and a son. The father is a conservative Christian pastor, and I don't know exactly, there's a lot of denominations, but he's in a very conservative denomination and does not support the LGBTQ lifestyle. His son does support the lifestyle. So the book is actually incredibly moving, and I think if you haven't read it, it's super valuable just to see. It's actually a helpful book to see how a father and a son, they don't, spoiler alert, they don't like resolve the issue by the end of the book. They end the book saying, we still don't agree, and we actually disagree more than we ever have. But it is a book where they're writing back and forth to each other to basically talk about how they continued to stay in a relationship with one another, even though they profoundly disagreed, and even though they did things to each other that were very hurtful. So I guess I'm trying to understand, so if this were a book instead of a father and a son writing about, he's homosexual, so they're writing about him being homosexual. So if this were a book, father and a son, mother and a daughter, whatever, two friends writing about staying in a relationship where they were profoundly disagreed on the topic of transgender, we would say that that's adult material simply because there's a transgender person in the book.
As far as I'm concerned, yes, and I just want to make it clear, this is not an issue, we're not talking about LGBTQ totally in general. That is sort of like we're after that whole community. We're specifically an issue that concerns minor children, and I frankly have no idea why anybody would discriminatory, because in our library, a parent has the authority to begin with, before a minor can get a library card, to sign what card that is. If the parent signs for the child to have access to the whole library, these books are still totally available. Nobody is being restricted from taking it. The only thing I think this does that's different is it gives a reasonable expectation for those parents who have a reasonable expectation of age-appropriate and topic-appropriate material. So a parent goes to juvenile, not every book will necessarily be what they expected, but they have an expectation of what is in 0 to 12. If they go to young adult, they have an expectation what's in 13 to 17. If they're a kind of parent who absolutely trusts their child or doesn't mind, they give them a young adult card. I mean a juvenile/adult card, and that child has just the same access that they have now. Discriminatory, as far as I'm concerned, it's not discriminatory. We have rules and laws to protect minors. And I think that this is a very important thing. I'm going to show you it looks like shock treatment, but there are 2 books in our library. They are adult books. But this is what we're talking about. We're talking about putting ideas in the library, putting ideas in kids' minds that may not have already been there. And this is like the biological faults that we are promoting. And it's in a lot of our books about men can be women, women can be men, and men can be pregnant. And it's a dangerous thing, and that's why I feel that there's every right for the library to be take an ethical and moral stand on this. In this book that is in our library, there's a statement that says, children who have the opportunity to suppress puberty and medically transition do not go through the Tanner stage. That's where you develop your sexual eggs and whatever you need. An essential step for future pregnancy, what this book says. But it's more important to support transition than for the adults/parents to be concerned about future fertility. So we're not talking just about whether we like a strange idea or a dissenting idea. We're talking about something that's lifelong consequences for children. Our library is still making it available to them. We're just putting it in an area where parents who don't mind can give permission. Parents who do mind can expect their young adult collection to be, to not have expose their children to such a radical agenda.
So those books that you read from are in the adult section, is that what you said?
What?
The books that you're quoting from are adult books or
Yes,
kids' books?
but I'm saying I have storylines in the juvenile, in the young adult books that support this belief in our, this is the end game. But we have juvenile, we have, we have books in the young adult that in story form present this kind of a reality.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I hope everybody, I think everybody on the board probably read the email I circulated a week or 2 ago, in which I think I was abundantly clear of my personal views on the topic. I want to come back to your question about I don't understand how the word portray, because that's probably the most.
You have something that you want to amend this with, or we can't just.
I have the right to ask as many questions as I want.
Sure, you do. I'm just asking, do you want to amend anything here, asking us what we mean when we
I
say
think
this?
before I vote on a policy, I have the right to ask what the policy is intended to mean and how it's going to be interpreted.
And
And I will
I'm trying to be
continue to do
disrespectful.
so. You are being disrespectful, whether you're trying to or not.
I'm sorry. I was wondering if you have any suggestions as to how this can be improved. You keep going back to the portrayed. Do you want to leave that word out? Is that what you're saying?
I want to start with, we need to understand what you guys intend by the policy, whether it's intended to be, if you're saying we don't think a transgender person should appear in a book, not be a main character, not be in the process of transitioning, That is different than saying we don't want to support the ideology of transitioning. So like, I don't think modern parents of kids that are under 18, unless their kids are homeschooled or in certain types of private education, most parents know their kids are going to encounter other kids who may identify with a sex different than their biological sex, or who may use pronouns different than what would reflect their biological sex. So I think the concern is, I agree with the idea of, hey, we don't want material in the kids section encouraging lifelong consequential decisions at a time when kids, like anatomy, their brain anatomy does not support the ability to make rational decisions, right? So that's one thing. It is a different thing to say, we do not want to allow any book in the kids section that has a human being in it that is transgender. Those are two different things. One of those is discriminatory, and one of them is not, in my opinion. And the one that we've adopted is discriminatory. Like saying you can't be in a book because you use a different pronoun is patently discriminatory. And it's why I asked the question about how we had, First Amendment lawyer look at this, because I'm pretty sure we probably haven't, and that word is problematic. So yeah, I mean, I think that word is not the only problem. I mean, my view would be, if the goal is to try to focus on the actual influence of gender transitioning on minors, then we send this policy back and reword it to actually accomplish that goal, because that's not what it says right now.
Well, the word portray means to make a picture of or depict. I think, as Alan said, you don't like the word, maybe we can talk about it. I think it's very clear. I don't think it's an issue. If there is a book that you're talking about that says Uncle Joe is a transgender and goes on and doesn't get into Uncle Joe's transition process or anything, maybe we'll take a look at that book at the time. We have a
You realize the Bible has people in it who cross-dress, right?
Joe, can I say something?
No, under this policy, the Bible cannot be in the children's section. Oh, hold on, we'll get there. I'm asking.
No, we're not getting anywhere. Sorry, Joe, I'm finished with that.
Under this policy, this is the point I'm making, the policy has been written so broadly and
And the Bible has characters, but the Bible calls bad, bad, and good, good.
Amen.
So there's the difference.
But you're not talking about, I'm not talking about calling it good or bad. I'm talking about you're ruling out books because a character is in it. So what if there is a book that's about a teen that goes through the gender transition process, and they write a book reflecting about their regrets on it? Under this policy, it can't be.
It would be an adult. So if a person is interested in it, they go to adult. It's still there.
I don't know how to write or make a policy better that is inclusive, because you mentioned there are homeschool families and there are kids in private education where their parents have not introduced them to that. And you may call them not modern, but their parents are choosing when to introduce these topics to their children, and they have every right to do that. They also have a right to come to the library and not have it be exposed to them. Anyone who is transgender, even if they're a minor, even if they're 7 years old, their parents can give them access to this material. How do you respect the rights of those other families? I don't know how to do it either. I'm not saying I have the answer, but I think that we're trying to categorize things in a way that make the library inclusive for everyone. The books are there, and people who don't want to introduce it to their minors because of the calamities that are happening with children who are detransitioning. Huge problems and lawsuits right now where children who are detransitioning because they were sold something that has affected them for the rest of their life. I mean, I'm not sure I have all the answers either, but how would you make the library a welcoming place for those families and also make the material available?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think, good question. Like, this is the discussion that we should be having, so this is why I'm asking the questions. I think modern is a time period statement. That's not a statement of not like antiquated versus. I mean, like people who are in this current time period, parenting young kids, like young as in non-adult children. I think the idea of I think we have run into the trouble of defining inclusivity as we will only ever have material that you want. And I think we go the other direction on our college campuses, and I think we're all familiar with that idea, but the idea that the library will never have material in it that a parent of a child disagrees with, that to me is not, I think that's part of why we struggle with inclusivity, because that's how we're trying to define it. Because like, as you set it up, it is an intractable problem, right? We can't solve it.
It's in the hands of the parents or the legal guardian.
But we're actually, I do want to come back to that. So that's come up a couple times. So let's jump to that, because we're actually not saying it's in their hands, because we're saying the board is going to make that decision for you about whether there's access. So, like, I do think that's another issue. But again, it's how broadly the policy is worded, and I think the irony is you know, I think personally I have my own views on age and kids, and everybody does, and when people should be exposed to this. My concern is about the broad nature of this policy, not discriminating against specific, or not trying to move books specifically because they promote or affirm or introduce gender transition ideology. That's different, right? Like, that's one thing. It's a different thing to say, we're going to
Were you
not
in
allow.
favor of that part?
Hold on, I'm speaking
You
now.
gotta
This is now the
follow
second time you interrupted me, okay?
You can't tell what you're saying, you're following question, and you got a double negative in that earlier one. You said they're not specifically targeting someone who is transition, I think is what you said. So are you saying that that's okay if we target that?
I think our policies already deal with things like graphic sexuality, and I think somebody changing their genitals falls under graphic sexuality. So I think we've already addressed the topic in that regard. So yes, I do think we have an obligation in that regard. What I'm saying is I have a problem with not allowing books in a particular section of the library because somebody appears a certain way in the book. That's the problem here. It's overly broad and discriminatory. And I was very clear about that in the email I shared with the board previously in that regard.
And you just happen to have a whole lot of people that disagreed that that's what this did when they voted to pass it the way it is. But the point, I think, that's getting missed, one thing Marcia said I think is incorrect, was that just because it's in the adult section doesn't mean that it's not available to any age person. It just means that any age person can't check it out and take it out of the library. But is my understanding, we don't have armed guards at the adult section, right? Okay, so anybody from age, as soon as they can walk in here and go to the computer and do a keyword search looking for trans, gender, whatever. They will find the books that, if this passes, were previously in the young adult section that have now been moved to the adult section, so they're on a shelf that they may have to get someone to help them reach it because they're not tall enough to get it, but they can get that book when they get into the library, and they can take it back to the table and they can read to their heart's content. And no parent has to be with them to do that. A parent or someone who's legally authorized to do so has to be with them to check the book out. That's all we're talking about here, is we're moving this from being targeted to the young adults to be in the adult section. But if they want to find it, they can find it, and they can read it, and they can do whatever they want to. But that's up to the parents who drop them off here to supervise what they're reading at that point. But we just want it so that the library has a kind of a truth in advertising, is what I called it when we moved it from the juvenile section. We're saying that the books in the juvenile section are safe for you to let your kids read if they come into the library. If they stay in the section that's appropriate for them, then we don't think that there's anything in there that's not safe for them to be looking at, okay? If they get into the adult section, Katie, bar the door. There's stuff in here I wouldn't even want to read, okay? But that's part of the world we live in, that there's all this material, as you say, that people like it, some people don't. We're not choosing for them, but we are saying that if you let your 13 to 17-year-old look into the young adult section, that this book, with regard to this situation, is not safe for them to get ideas, because it's not a good idea to encourage transgenderism with regard to 13 to 17-year-olds. And there's a state law, in effect, that says basically the same thing. I mean, it's against the law to help someone gender transition, if that can be done. So,
All right, hang on. I want to clarify something, because Marcia's, when I asked the question at the very beginning, I asked this question specifically. I said, if a book so much as portrays someone in the book that is transgender, it will be reclassified. Is that a correct interpretation of the policy? It was one of my first questions I asked.
she said yes.
You said yes. Do you agree that is, because you just said, oh, a bunch of people disagreed with you when they voted on it. Do you agree that is a correct interpretation of this policy?
Given the definition of portray, I think yes. I think that if the book is what was the definition you read there?
Make a picture of, depict.
Yeah.
So you think the presence of anyone who is transgender in a book in any capacity is dangerous to kids?
No, I don't think that the presence of them, we just talked about that.
Isn't that what portray means, to portray a character in a book? So like if you have a protagonist or a hero or a heroine or an antagonist, and they have maybe they themselves or their friend happens to be transgender, but the book is not about a transgender topic, would that be relocated under this policy? This is what I'm getting at. That not about, y'all keep coming back to the process of gender transitioning. I've been more clear than anybody on this board about my views on that, and I think we need to be clear about something. We are choosing to regulate, as we have done in the past. There are things that we do not allow. That is an active choice to regulate, and I have supported almost all of that. So I think the idea that I don't think we should regulate content, this is not like we totally don't regulate anything. The idea is the philosophy and the reasons why we regulate. So regulating an idea of affirming gender transition, or most of the wording of this is not discriminatory, but I think saying that the presence of somebody who appears a certain way, or in this case, it's not even appears a certain way, they could just say, hey, I'm gonna try out, I'm using a different pronoun in a book. To me, that is discriminatory.
Okay, so
I'm asking, do we narrow it down? And I think that takes care of a lot of potential issues that we have.
would you like to offer an amendment to what's been offered today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, well, let me read it. I mean, my suggestion was send it back and let's actually get legal counsel involved and word this to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. I don't
But we
think.
have accomplished what we're trying to accomplish, just to be clear.
Well, I understand that, but what you're trying to accomplish is patently discriminatory and problematic.
Do you?
Before we go any further, I think it boils things down to the root cause for me and what's the central root debate. And you have a lot of rhetoric, a lot of people are espousing, you know, personal opinions, and it's great and wonderful, but what is the root thing that we're arguing about? We're arguing about what shelf a book appears on. That's what we're arguing about. We're not arguing about whether it leaves the library, whether it's banned, whether it's anything. It's literally, what shelf is this book going to be placed on? That's the root argument we're here. The library has policies and procedures where anybody in this library can get any book they want. They just gotta get the right card. You have access to anything you want in this library. So for me, I think it's time to stop debating. I don't care, you know, I don't have a single problem with putting a book that portrays or depicts something on a different shelf. Put it in an adult section. Parents have the right, give that kid all the access they want, they have it. So I think we're wasting a lot of time debating a lot of opinions over what shelf a book is on. Put it on a shelf, and let's let the parents have the access and the permission, and they decide what their kid gets. The library doesn't decide. All we decide is what shelf the book is on.
I think it does matter what shelf a book is on, because we're restricting content, restricting access to content. To me, I think my views on transgenderism would align with what you're, most of the people on this board, but we are restricting. Children have a First Amendment right as well. They do, I mean, there's legal cases that talk about speech that is neither obscene as to use nor subject to some other legitimate prescription, cannot be suppressed solely to protect the young from ideas or images that a legislative body thinks unsuitable for them. There is a lot of other case law as well about even just restricting access to materials. I agree with Joe. I think we should refer this back to committee, get legal counsel to review the policy, because as it's currently written, I think it is too broad and discriminatory. Parents already have the right to monitor what materials their children are reading. If a parent is concerned about their children being exposed to certain ideas, they can monitor their children's books, they can have conversations with their children, they can parent. They don't have to rely on the library to parent their children for them. And I'm also concerned about why this policy, you know, it's not, again, for me, targeting transgender, it's targeting any group. Because A, this policy is about transgender, but there's no reason why it's targeting transgender other than it is harmful to children. I would agree that, you know, children should not be getting sex assignment surgeries, be receiving hormone therapies. My personal beliefs on that really shouldn't involve this, because what we're talking about is discriminating against an entire group of people. There are a lot of things in books in the young adult section that are dangerous to children, just as or more dangerous than transgender ideology. That one book you discussed utilized a transgender character, but you also talked about drugs, you talked about alcohol. We have books about suicide. Suicide is a far greater threat, mental health threat to our youth than transgenderism. There is a lot of other topics. You can talk about gun violence, you can talk about trauma of kids going through school shootings, you can talk about broken families and divorce. There are a lot of topics that are dangerous to children and that parents might not want their children exposed to. We can't regulate and move all topics that might have some negative impact to the adult section. And we can't target one group just because we don't like that group.
It's not just because we don't like that group, Brian. That's not why we had this concern on the table.
And why are we putting this policy in place?
I don't see us targeting any groups in this thing. I just literally this is what shelf is the book going on and who has access to that book on that shelf. Literally, it's that simple of a debate. You don't want,
I think there
you
are,
want parents to be in charge then put things where parents are in charge of. If a parent gives you a full access card, then that's the parent making the choice. It ain't me. It's not me telling a kid he can't go get a book. It's a parent saying, go get the book. That's the parent's choice, the parent's decision.
Doesn't
I have no problem putting something on an adult shelf and saying, parents, you make the decision for your children, whether they get that book or not. It's out of my hands at that point.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think the challenge is from a legal perspective, the law views an adult card as a form of restriction on access. So I think whether you personally agree with that or not, it is a form of restriction. We are limiting access by making it more difficult. Now, there are times when that's appropriate, so I think we do have to consider it's not just what shelf you can get it on. It is a form of restriction, and that's the question we're wrestling with. I think that's the question Stephanie brought up to me is how do we appropriately restrict without being overly restrictive? And that's the question I'm proposing, and what I'm suggesting is this policy is too broad because it doesn't just restrict access to books that affirm, celebrate. I think we have kind of several words indicating a positive disposition towards gender transitioning. It scoops up all books, all people who are portrayed a certain way, and that's a different and far more discriminatory approach. That would be like me saying, well, we're not gonna have, I think, and I don't think this, just to be clear, but I think women should all stay at home. They shouldn't work in the workforce, right? So we're gonna take any book that portrays a woman working in the workforce, and we're not gonna allow it in this section. And the idea is we would not ever want to restrict something because of how people are portrayed, even if the book isn't about that. Like, the point is you get books that aren't even about gender reassignment surgery caught up in this policy, and that is discriminatory.
Do you have a amendment? Oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
I tried calling on the phone, but I keep hearing the word discrimination and discriminatory. I just want to say legally and morally. I do not believe that this policy is discriminatory. If it was, I would not have voted for it in committee, and I plan to vote for it again today. So I think what we have is people disagreeing on terms such as restrictive. I don't believe it's restrictive. I think that we are giving people a lot of access to this material. I really appreciate what Stephanie had to say. We're trying to take a very difficult situation and find the best solution that we can for the times in which we live. And it's not perfect, but I don't think we need to let that become the enemy of us doing something that we know is going to be good for our collection and good for our community. So I don't agree with that definition of discrimination. I don't think it's discriminatory. I don't think it's restrictive, and I 100% support it. And I don't know, is there anything on the table? Because if not, I'd like to officially call the question.
I want this in the minutes. Have we had external legal counsel review this policy?
I think we have was that a motion?
I have a question, and I have a right to ask
You
questions.
just made a motion. What's that? Go ahead. Yeah. Is there a second to call the question? Okay. My understanding of the rules on calling the question is that we have to vote on that motion when it's made, with the idea that a vote for that calling the question is that you've heard enough debate to vote. A no vote is that you would like to hear more debate or get more facts or whatever before you vote. So the motion on the table is to call the question. So I'll get a raise of hands on this, I guess. Everybody who's for calling the question to go ahead and vote on the motion. This is not a vote on the motion. This is a vote on calling the question at this time. Everybody who wants to call the question now, raise your hand. Okay, those opposed? Okay, so, we do have a vote to call the question at this time. So, as I understand it, we move directly to a vote on the motion, or actually on the committee's recommendation at this time. So everyone in favor of the committee's recommendation to the board, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
I guess do a show of hands again. Everybody in favor?
Elizabeth Spade.
All opposed to the committee's motion? Okay. All right, motion passes.
Jill, can you make sure the minutes reflect that this policy has not been reviewed by outside counsel?
I have a executive director's report.
First item is the state aid agreement and library budget form for the library system for fiscal year 2025. We've received this in your packet. It has to be certified. The library is in compliance with SD statutes and regulations pertaining to state aid. And it has to be approved by the library board in the presence of a quorum. It's been completed. It categorizes portions of our budget as directed by the state library. There was a motion to approve this document.
So moved.
I have a question.
Okay.
Is this the state aid that's restricted by the budget proviso 27.1?
Yes.
So that maybe you could go over for us how the state library has defined that?
State library has, this form does not address the proviso. It just certifies that we're in compliance with statutes and regs pertaining to state aid, related to this document itself, which is, these categories are in the state budget. I mean, in the regs related to state aid. The proviso is, there's a separate document that relates to the fact whether we have a collection development policy and a request for reconsideration process. That's a separate document that the chair of the board and the director have to sign.
Okay, so this does not require us to be in compliance with the proviso.
The state library is who has to be in compliance with the proviso. The proviso addresses how the state library administers the state aid. That's my understanding. And so the burden is on the state library to comply with the proviso in the distribution of state aid.
So we're just applying for the state aid, and then the onus is on the state library to make sure that we're in compliance?
Yes.
We're not certifying that we are in compliance with state law.
Well, it specifically says, I hereby certify this library to be in compliance with all South Carolina statutes and regulations pertaining to state aid. This document has been approved by the library board in the presence of a quorum.
The proviso applies to the budget, this year's budget, the state aid that was budgeted in the state libraries. State library, the state aid to public libraries appears in the state library's budget. The State Library Act is the agency that distributes state aid, and they're the ones that require the libraries to meet certain requirements to receive that state aid. So,
We submit some paperwork to the state library, and then based on that paperwork we submit to the state library, they submit to the legislature something that says that we are entitled to the state aid. Is that right?
I don't know that they submit it to the state legislature, but they verify, they certify that we're in compliance. They're the ones that determine our compliance level.
I haven't asked for the Attorney General's opinion on that proviso, so there's still some question about what the definition even is.
The state librarian has requested an Attorney General's opinion regarding the proviso.
I'm
Because,
just a little hesitant because it sounds like we're signing something saying we're compliant with something that people don't even know what we're supposed to be compliant with.
well, I read this several times because I was concerned about the same thing. But as I read it, I mean, we don't have to certify it if the board doesn't want to certify it, I don't know what will happen. But it's up to the board to whether they want to approve this document or not, and I appreciate the concern in light of the fact that the state library is still trying to figure out how to enforce the proviso.
Elizabeth,
Comply with it, but it's, my interpretation is the burden's on the state library to decide that.
Elizabeth, my understanding of the proviso is that libraries are supposed to have sexually explicit material out of young adult and juvenile sections, and our policies already have that in place, so I don't have any concerns about us not being in compliance with the state budget.
Yeah, I mean, the proviso uses the words pure in interest, which is identical to what's in our current policy, so I don't see a lack of alignment there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that I think our policies are in compliance with my understanding of the proviso. My only hesitation was that the state library seemed to take a different approach, and they had asked for an Attorney General opinion. But if as a board, we're comfortable saying that we understand the proviso to mean that we're not providing sexually explicit content to children while they're under, I think, without explicit parental consent, I do think we are compliant, because I know we've done a lot of work in that area, and I think we are compliant.
If the board is.
I just wanted to make, oh, I'm sorry, but I'm done.
No, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, like, my only hesitation was just what you had said about the Attorney General opinion. I think we are compliant, I just didn't know if there was like kind of gyrations coming down that we needed to pause for.
Well, we can pause if the board would prefer that I get an interpretation of this language from the state library, and I'd be happy to do so. I just,
I mean, I guess I feel like we can certify it based on current law and our current policy, and then if a legal interpretation comes out that's contrary to that, then we'll come back and say, you know, hey, we're not in compliance anymore, but I think as of today, we're in compliance.
and my understanding is the state library decides whether we're in compliance or not. This is, maybe we insert the phrase to the best of our knowledge or something. We could amend the form by hand and, or something like that. That would help.
I would renew my vote.
Senator Rice has offered to come and speak to us if we have any questions about the proviso, so that is an option if that's something we want to do next month. But like I said, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make it complicated. I would be comfortable with, if Alan's okay with signing the form, that's fine with me too.
I think James made a motion to approve, and I seconded it.
Yeah, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Just to let those of you who wonder what proviso we're talking about, the state legislature passed, was it a law or is it just?
It was part of the budget, it was attached to the budget.
Absolutely. Okay, so it said that the funds that come from, we get most of our funds from county funds for our libraries, but some funds come from the state. And those funds were stated in that budget proviso that they keep talking about, to not be allowed to be paid to any libraries that would not certify that their collection did not have materials in it that appeal to the prurient interests. Any of you who took constitutional law would know what prurient is, and the rest of you, good for you. You weren't bored by that, but it's Prurient, I think. And it's our policy actually has that wording in it that we passed not too long ago. So we are parallel with what the state proviso called for. So if we proceed with this, it's under the auspices of the fact that we think that our policies are in alignment with the wording in the proviso that they passed, that we can allow, or that the state libraries, would allow us to receive the state funding that we're entitled to because we are in alignment with the state policy. That was a long way to say that, but I'm sorry. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. I'll sign.
We've received a notice from our Secretary, Kristen Odom, that she can no longer serve in the position of secretary, and my suggestion is that you all consider charging the nominating committee with filling that position later this year and for the coming fiscal year. We're not in need of that position to be filled immediately for a couple of months, but it's up to you how you choose to do so. It can either bring it temporarily or just let it remain vacant until the nominating committee meets later this fall for the next year.
Is there anybody that wants to do it? I mean, I'll nominate somebody from the floor right now, if anybody wants to volunteer. I'm gonna nominate Tommy in a minute, just to make everybody vote on it.
I like the motion where you leave it right.
Okay, so
We don't have to act on that, right, if we're just gonna leave it vacant.
by acclamation, I think we can leave it vacant until the nominating committee fills it for the next upcoming term. Jill's taking care of all the secretarial duties, thankfully. There's no telling what would show up in the minutes if I were doing that, or what wouldn't show up, be more important.
I have a couple of little things before.
Yeah.
And the event guide for September and October is at your place. It'll be distributed, out for distribution now. Also would like to give you a summer reading update. 4,913 enrollees completed the summer reading challenge. This represents a 12.3% increase in the number over the 2023 completers. Also an update about the Blue Ridge Branch Library. We received the building permit approval finally this morning.
Praise the Lord.
After many, many months of waiting. The detention pond is in, and grading for the curb and gutter is to be finished tomorrow, and they'll start pouring the curb and gutter next week. They'll also start digging the footing this week after the rebar comes.
So my understanding is the plumbing is gonna be the next, because it's a slab, they're gonna put that in, and then they'll, the utilities.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think they're trenching. They've done some trenching for utilities.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm talking, you need to be talking, you're probably up there every day supervising it.
What I'm saying is that Brexit, so, because of kind of, it got kind of standstill.
Yeah.
So
It's bad when government,
hopefully we'll begin to move now.
it's bad when government is held up by government. Yeah.
Do we have an expected completion date? Or
He said.
Sort of expected
9
completion date.
months, but, considering weather and considering the great slowdown since he said that the last 2 months. I would say maybe July,
Next summer, yeah.
somewhere ballpark.
My understanding is that they had to have, I think the fire marshal was the last one to sign off, and that must have just happened to get that
One
permit.
of-
I think that was super cute, and I hope they have a great time.
Yeah, this is a well-known romantic place, to, say your nuptials. And, I think it was done in the adult section. So it, passed muster.
Alan, I would like to bring up some new business, in light of our, vote on the materials committee. I would like to move that we direct the executive director to seek outside legal counsel with expertise in First Amendment issues to review our collection development maintenance policy, just to ensure that we are protecting ourselves.
Okay? Do I have a second on that? Okay. Is there any, discussion? Okay, so the, yes?
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, are you gonna say it, because I didn't hear it?
Oh, I'm sorry, the motion was, Brian made the motion to ask, the director to, ask for a, First Amendment lawyer to take a look at our collections,
Development and maintenance policy.
collections, development, and maintenance policy to determine whether we are in, compliance constitutionally.
Got it, thanks.
Okay? All in favor of, Brian's, motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Let's raise, show of hands. All in favor, raise your hand. Four in favor, all opposed. Okay, motion fails.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, I've got, I got some public comment that,
Comments in front of these.
Quick draw.
the first person to sign up was Lindsay Molina.
Lindsay had to go back to work.
Okay, second person is Maria Catherine.
Yes. Hi, I have a First Amendment issue to raise with the board. I am a parent and I have an MLIS from an ALA accredited school. And I tried to check this out for a child and they couldn't. This beautiful alphabet book aimed at preschoolers. I don't know which letter of the alphabet you're in trouble with, but after hearing this meeting, I'm pretty sure it's LGBT and Q. You can't check this out in a child's card. I went to the front desk to get her an unrestricted card. They are age restricted. My child's First Amendment rights are being infringed because there are restrictions. This book is not accessible. It is not accessible to children under a certain age, even if I want them to be accessible. I have an MILS. I'm comfortable giving my child that access, and I'm not allowed at the library. When you do this to the trans material, you're doing the same thing, all right? They do not have access. And my second thing is, your beliefs are not my beliefs. I should not have to subscribe to them. As you guys are going on about the Bible, and the Bible says right from wrong, we have different beliefs. I identify as Christian. My church was designed by Methodist ministers. It is drag queen Jesus. It was designed at National, okay? My beliefs are not your beliefs. You cannot make these moral decisions for every family in Greenville County. Thank you.
Excuse me, wait. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first part.
My child wanted to check this book out. I had to put it on my card because you cannot get an unrestricted card until you are age 5.
But let me just say, so you were able to get it for your child to read, you just were not able to check it out with your
On
child's
her card,
book.
she cannot check this book out. That is correct. And that is the issue. That's an issue that's been raised in libraries before. A child cannot check the book out in Texas. And I cannot give her the access to check it out.
You cannot check it out yourself.
I can check it out on my card, but you know full well that it's been raised in libraries before that that does not constitute access.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, the question that we brought up earlier is that
The
book,
question that-
excuse me for a second. What we said earlier was that book is available for your child to look at in the library. Is that correct?
Yes, I would like to give.
Just a second. Is the book available in the library for your child to look at?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and is that book available for you to check out for your child?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and you are the parent of that child?
Yes.
And so if you give permission for your child to check that book out on your card, that's you as a parent looking over what your child is reading and approving that, is that correct?
You know that doesn't cut it. You know what the ALA says about that.
The ALA?
You know what the American Library Association says about that. That is not access.
Just so you have a choice, you don't have to stand here. Come on in. We're just gonna stand and speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you said. I wasn't trying to be argumentative. I just really want to know if you were unable to get the book. That you can get the book, just not on your child's library card. Is that correct?
Yes, and that does not constitute access. You know full well.
I understand what you're saying. I understand. I just want to make sure that things were being done as we thought. Thank you. Next person is Beth Wadsworth. I think that's what this is.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all of your hard work, and thank you for voting to move the books to the adult section. It's much appreciated. It seems there's a lot of people here that need to hear this again. Basically, 3% make up our gay and lesbian population. 97% are heterosexual, and we will not allow 3% to change our family values. 3% want to dictate the rules regarding how our children think and learn. Our children are not for sale. We will fight for them, protect them, and do whatever is necessary to keep them from seeing these inappropriate books per their parents. Children belong to their families, not to the gay and lesbian community. We won't allow the children to be indoctrinated with their lifestyle. Thank you.
Next person is Sheila Kine.
Good afternoon. Inclusivity is an interesting word. So the last I looked, there were 130 unique titles. There are over 200 if you just search transgender, but 130, I went through each one. Non-fiction titles on the issue, on the topic of transgenderism in the adult section of the library. 175 copies of those titles, and anywhere checked over the last 4 months, 4 to 8 of those copies are checked out at one time. Of those, there are 2 titles that represent my point of view, my worldview, based on the reality of biological sex at birth. One's a very well-known one. Let me find the title here. And it's been checked out for months. There's 2 copies in the library system with 5 people waiting. That book is called Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. So when you talk about inclusivity, and you talk about lawsuits, because we know, I think you're from the ACLU, maybe not. They would have, they're gonna sue you no matter what, I'll tell you that. It's what they get paid to do, it's their job. Be aware there might be legal action on the other side. When we look at these books, it is so clear the bias. And I don't have access to a book that I'd like to read. I wanted to read that book for months and I can't get my hands on it. And the proviso that you just signed off on, you said you're certifying that you have no books in the children's section that are sexually explicit. It's interesting because it was a group of us who submitted 80 book review requests, only 58 have made it through the process. And you agreed with, gosh, 90% of those that you had explicit materials in the section. So I mean, I don't have time to do librarian's job. I'm kind of done with these book review requests. That's your job. So I hope there's no legal action from the state on that, and the legislators who put the proviso on spending that money. $3.5 million in new materials. It's sad. It's something that we could probably all agree on. Low child literacy rates in South Carolina, programs that could be done to address that, access to books that could help with that, phonics books, etc., are not talked about at all. I talked to a non-modern homeschooling mother just the other day. She's an avid user of the library. Since 2018, she's requested about a dozen books, not explicitly Christian, but just things she'd like to use for homeschooling. Not one of those books has been carried by the library. So we're now going to be exploring that. Is book requests. I've made a few as well.
Thank you.
Just won't get in.
Sorry, 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all we had signed up today.
Renew my motion.
Renew your motion to adjourn. Thank you.